Hello, everybody that came to watch the show as I very, very clumsily get myself in order over here. Oh man, I just had my entire browser crash like 3 seconds before I went live. I had everything set up. I was going to just jump in all happy, and then all of a sudden Chrome decided to be like, you don't have permissions to do that anymore. So forgive my timing. How are you guys doing? Nice to see you guys. Yo. Yes, it's nice to see you guys in here. I appreciate you guys for coming. Let me get this started pretty quick. I realize that there's a lot of other stuff going on with Taco Tuesday or whichever other alliterate sounding word you want to use. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. Welcome. I wanted to talk about this topic. What is a sound? Because it is at the very basis of what we do in this hobby. We listen to music, we play music, we use equipment to make sounds, and then we listen to them, and then we try to describe them to other people. So what is a sound? Let me just jump in by sharing a couple of streams here. We'll start with the basics, and hopefully you guys can appreciate what I'm trying to do with this. And hopefully it will you know what? I have to change this. I have to change it to share tab because otherwise you won't get to hear the sound. Yes, there we go. Add to stream. Let's start that over. So we're going to start with this. These are only a couple minutes each, so you guys bear with me. Feedback if the sound is okay, if my mic's okay, that kind of thing. Let me know what you think. We'll go from here. I'll play like 3 minutes of each of these basically, and then we'll get started on my topic.
I'm Jake O'Neill, creator of Animographs, and this is how speakers make sound. The basic speaker design has a motor that drives the speaker back and forth, attached to a cone to translate this movement into pressure waves that travel through the air.
I hope nobody is lost yet. This is basically what is at the core of our hobby, right? So I wanted to start with this first.
Let's look at each part in depth. The motor. A voice coil and magnet work together to form the speaker motor. The voice coil has a long section of thin copper wire wound many times around a heat-resistant cylinder called the former.
It's a little bit more in depth than I hoped. Hopefully this is educational too. This is actually about 7 minutes long, so I might want to skip through some of this.
When electricity flows through the copper windings, it naturally generates a surrounding magnetic field. This phenomenon is what makes an electromagnet. An electromagnet can act just like a permanent magnet, and yet, incredibly, its polarity, or positive and negative pole orientation, and magnetic intensity can be changed by altering the supplied electric current.
Okay, so at that point that he's making there with the electricity that's being, the intensity, the frequency, the level, all of those things create the movement of the cone forwards and backwards. Let me just skip through where the sound actually starts to come out.
If a speaker only moves back and forth, how does it reproduce an entire symphony of sounds at the same time? Let's look at basic sound wave operation.
There we go.
Air is an elastic medium, meaning that it returns to its original shape once an acting force is removed. Speakers push and pull air molecules, making them ram into each other in a domino effect. This wave reaches and moves your eardrum, which sends a signal that your brain interprets as sound. You could even say that hearing is just movement detection.
That's important to note. Movement detection. I wanted to focus more on range of sound and how we pick up the sounds.
and 20,000 hertz. That's a lot of available frequency to work with.
Right. So that basically sums up the speaker part of the hobby. Why am I can't see the comments. There's a comment down here I can't fully see. Why is it not scrolling? Work with me. There we go. Right. So as we get a signal into the speaker diaphragm and the movement as it moves back and forth, it creates all these different frequencies based on what it's being fed. That's part one. So that's what's happening basically in air. And I wanted to showcase that first before we got into the next level, which is basically like, how does our brain actually interpret those signals? This is the next one I want to talk about. This is only about 2 minutes, so just bear with us. These are pretty cheesy.
Have you ever wondered how sounds make their way from the source all the way to your brain?
I am
Take a trumpet, for instance.
ripping
When
off
it's
other
played,
people's videos.
it makes sound waves in the
Here we
air.
go.
The outer ear catches the waves, which then travel through a narrow passageway called the ear canal. The sound waves reach the eardrum, which is a membrane roughly half the size of a dime.
Okay, so all of the multitude of frequencies that are created by the speaker movement, kind of like the graphics on my shirt right here. Depending on how close or how far apart the sound compressions are because of the speaker driver, they create these compression densities or lower pressures in air, and those frequencies move along and hit your eardrum and then create this effect inside the head.
They make the eardrum vibrate, which in turn vibrates 3 tiny bones called the malleus, incus, and stapes.
Okay, so this is actually quite in depth in terms of like what's going on. Let me move ahead to what is happening inside the actual sound reception part.
It's filled with fluid, and the sound vibrations make this fluid ripple, which
So the air vibrations move the eardrum into fluid vibrations.
creates waves. Hair-like structures called stereocilia sit on top of hair cells and are grouped together as hair cell bundles inside the cochlea. The hair cells inside the cochlea ride these waves, and the hair bundles are moved. The hair bundle on top
FYI, when you start to lose your hearing, what's happening is these hair cells move so violently or so much they break off, and then you can't hear anything anymore.
top of the hair cell turns these movements into electrical signals. As the hair bundles are moved, ions rush into the top of the hair cells, causing the release of chemicals at the bottom of the hair cells. The chemicals bind to the auditory nerve cells and create an electrical signal, which travels along the auditory nerve to the brain. Different hair cells respond to different frequencies of sound. The hair cells at the base of the cochlea detect higher-pitched sounds, such as a piccolo or flute. The hair cell
So this is an important thing. Your high frequencies are normally like, you know how when the people talk about how if at a certain age you start losing your high frequency pitch. You notice in this section right here, they're talking about the specific cells that are designed or that pick up high frequencies are right at the opening of your ear canal or your ear cochlea or whatever it's called. So in that area, those hair cells at the front, because of high frequency and movement over time, they start to break off first, and that's why you get that reduction in high frequency reception earlier on or like later on in life, because they endure so much more movement because they're right at the front.
cells toward the top of the spiral detect progressively lower-pitched sounds, such as a trumpet or trombone. At the very top or apex of the spiral, the hair cells detect the lowest-pitched sounds, such as a tuba. The auditory nerve carries the electrical signal to the brain.
So we get this idea that these signals are carried to the brain through this structure, and it's a matter of like converting air movement into fluid movement back into physical movement into neuroreceptor cells that send the signal to the brain. So here here is another one that has to do with what happens after that signal is in your brain and what the brain does with it. Let me see. Here we go. Share, add to studio. Here we go.
Psychoacoustics refers to how a sound wave in air is transduced into a pressure wave in the ear, which becomes a mechanical wave inside the cochlea, which becomes a pattern of neural activity in the brain. That pattern of neural activity is perceived as Led Zeppelin, or Joni Mitchell, or Kendrick Lamar, or Shostakovich, or whoever you might be listening to. How does that happen? How does that simple little sensory organ transduce acoustic pressure waves into sound? We're going to be talking in this course about pitch perception, loudness perception, spatial localization. How do we know where something is coming from? And how much do we have to change a signal in our mixes, let's say, to get us to believe that that sound source moved? We'll be talking about...
So this is just an excerpt from a course. They teach this at Berkeley. This is a Berkeley course talking about psychoacoustics. But what we're talking about here is how the brain deals with the signals that we get from our ears, and when those signals can be manipulated through tone and phase and a lot of other things with mixing and engineering, which is exactly how we have music, because it's captured through a recording and then it's mixed and engineered and then it's produced to create a result. So this is all to do with just how you could be outside, you could be at a park, you could be at a studio, you could be listening to headphones. All of this stuff applies. How is it actually working for us in a space? Let me just get to another point here. I have a bunch of these tabs to share. I'm basically piggybacking off of other material to showcase what I'd like to share. I'm borrowing streams from other places. This is an awesome resource here, acoustic geometry. This topic basically applies to, like, what's going on in a room and how it functions in a room. All of this helps me understand how to perfect my
I'm John
pursuit.
Calder of Acoustic Geometry. Let's talk about acoustics, which is basically how sound works in rooms. It may seem complicated, so let's make it simpler. Most rooms have flat walls and flat ceilings, and sound bounces off of these. So how does that affect the sound? I'll use these two Nerf guns to demonstrate. I've got this one aimed, so this disc goes directly to the ear. That represents direct sound. I've got this one aimed, so that disc bounces off the wall, and it represents reflected sound. I'll shoot them
Oh, no, go back.
both at the same time.
My bad. I got trigger happy there. So I wanted to actually, when I saw this first, you see what's about to happen with these discs are supposed to represent the sounds coming out of a certain point source, and the walls are going to act like the way the sound waves bouncing around the room. The first time I saw this, I wanted this dummy to get shot in the head, but alas, that's not what this is about.
Reflected sound arrives at our ears later than direct sound, even though it started out at the same time, because it's traveling farther. And this wall is only one flat surface. There are at least 6 in the average room, and that's a lot of reflected sound. But why is reflected sound bad?
This visualization
I'll demonstrate
really
using
helps.
these 2 identical patterns.
Now remember earlier we're talking about how the ear captures movement of air from sound waves from our speakers. So this is an important visualization for how these different times of sound affect the air in the room outside of the ear, but inside of the ear can kind of play tricks on how we interpret the sound.
The blue pattern represents direct sound waves, and the red pattern represents reflected sound waves. They start out together, but when I move the red one backwards, like a delayed sound reflection, it creates destructive interference patterns which changes the original sound wave. Here's the problem. Original sound waves are distorted by strong, later arriving reflections. Also, sound travels really fast, about 1,130 feet per second. A sound wave will bounce back and forth between these 2 walls about 60 times in 1 second. Sound travels so fast, it fills a room almost instantly, And this is only one bounce angle. Every room has thousands. How can we make our rooms sound better? Remember our Nerf guns?
So this is where that actually goes into talking about diffraction, diffusion, using sound panels to block sounds out. This is a visualization.
It also
of what
reduces the
diffraction
strength of
actually
sound
does.
bounces. A
I'll
diffuser
show it
works
anyways,
by
'cause it's a good
scattering the
visual
sound reflections in
representation.
different directions, smoothing out destructive interferences throughout the room. Room acoustics
So
are greatly...
the idea, I could stop sharing this. The idea there is basically that the curved surface and diffraction actually separates these waves. So to get more to the point, the reason why I wanted to ask this question about sound and like how, like what is sound, because once it's in our head, our brains, our individual brains, my brain, your only brain, only your brain is doing the work. When you hear a sound, much like when a tree falls in the forest and no one's around, does it make a sound? Sound is much like saying taste, right? Like our sensory perception. And my other channel today, I talked about this, where when we are born, we don't know what blue is. When we grow up, our eyes might perceive blue. We might be able to see the color blue, but we are taught the word blue or the association of a sensory perception as blue. This is a duck. It's the same thing. We see the pattern and colors and we're told this is a duck. So we associate our sensory perception with the habitual teachings of society or what have you. So sound is a raw experience that we apply a habitually taught type of description. So when I snap, you recognize it as a snap. You've heard this sound before. Even if I didn't tell you what it was, you might be, I've heard that before. That sounds like a snap, so you can describe it for what it is, but can we say this snap is high pitch, low pitch, medium pitch, mid-range? Is it distorted? We need to be able to articulate in words to share what's in our head with other people. And therein lies my question about what is sound, because if we are in a unique position as audio listeners and the journey and the process of listening is very solo, it's just us listening. I don't hear like you hear and you don't hear like I hear. We can agree, yes, that's a duck, like that's a snap, but when we start to talk about is it high pitch, low pitch, is it clean, is it clear, we have to ascribe words to describe the perception of it. So we might hear it the same depending on our frequency range, and everybody's ears have different curves. Like how many of you in the comments, or link in the comments if you see this later on, because this is live and I like this interaction. How many have done a hearing test and have their hearing curve? What does your hearing curve look like? I don't know what mine is, but I'm definitely going to get one. And we all have one because our ears are definitely not hearing flat. We don't perceive sound at all the same level. There are lots of tests to describe this process. There are curves to hearing. And as the volume goes up, the curve changes. So at low level volume, you're hearing a certain way, but as the volume goes up, that curve changes even inside your ear. So the reason why I wanted to ask this question again is to mitigate the types of conversations that are had in community about this or that, best or worst, or favorite or poor, or I like this, or no, you're wrong, tubes are the best. Whatever the debate is not really about the sound, because that's an irrelevant argument. We each have our own individual experiences, and we may argue about the words used, but that's not describing accurately the sound that we hear. Just like I say, cheddar cheese is the best. Someone else might say, nah, Swiss cheese is the best, or Gouda is the best, or I like pizza, other people like hot dogs. Or when you go to a baseball game, is it hot dogs or is it burgers? Do people that like food sit around and argue about what foods are the best? Do people talk about like, oh, vermicelli's the best? No, spaghetti's the best. Is this a kind of argument that food lovers, I mean, think about it. Taste and sound are both sensory perceptions. Some people like soft surfaces. Some people prefer smooth and hard surfaces. Some people like hot and cold. It's not a debate. We don't have communities of people debating about how velvet or velour or rayon fabrics feel in our hands. This is, you can have, but it's not a very hot topic. People in fashions don't have these things. It is in sound, but why is that? Why is describing sound so difficult? Why does it cause the controversy? Because there's a science to sound. People are not measuring cheese. I mean, maybe they are, but I don't know. Or maybe they measure, like, wine connoisseurs can really get heated and debated about wine because the taste and the textures and you know what I mean? Like, there's something to that. But I wanted to address the sound one to ground the argument in the idea that what we're doing is having a dialogue between our personal experiences with sound and how we perceive it ourselves, comparing it against somebody else's perception of it, and maybe the words are just off. So I wanted to kind of go through these couple of things and say, like, there is a physics to it, and then there's a very, very subjective end to it. And what often happens is those 2 points of view, or 2 points of science, because one is neurological, the other one is physics. Physics doesn't have the opinion. Physics doesn't care what you feel, doesn't care what you like or not. Physics just is the way it is. There is a language to describe that, and it is different from I like or don't like, or our descriptions that are any kind of adjective in English. Other languages I don't speak, so I can't discuss how they talk about these topics. But for me, it's important to acknowledge the fact that those arguments are different. And when we discuss them, and even if you see it going on in comment sections, you can kind of navigate carefully about those kinds of conversations. The wording that we use is more awkward than the topic itself. So the physics deserves its own argument, and there's a lot of measuring that needs to be done because our ears are not as sensitive enough or trustworthy enough because of the psychoacoustics aspect of it. We have a 6 to 6.5, or depending on how fat your head is, you might have a 7-inch wide dispersion or discrepancy between your left and right ear. If you look up the wavelength of, or whatever wavelength is 6.5 inches, it's about 2 kilohertz. So you have a time discrepancy between the left and right ear from even one point source, if it's left or right of you, where your ears are going to automatically cancel out those signals. Your right ear from this side will get the signal first, and your left ear will get the opposite end of the thing. So in your head, it will cancel out. I wanted to play one more clip of binaural beating, but then you would need to have headphones, and I didn't tell people to have headphones on, so I didn't go into that. But right now, right now I'm getting distracted. I'm reading some of the comments. Yeah. 15 dB, that's really low. 15 dB is almost inaudible. That's such a low noise floor. Yeah. Yeah. When I have a headache, I feel like my head expands too. It's a big problem. But I'm hoping that this makes sense. And I'm hoping that the nature of the discussion is that it is a very divided thing, and we don't need to engage one way or the other, and to understand the differences between the science of it and the description of our personal or our subjective experience of it. You may have a favorite, but that doesn't mean it's any more or less than anybody else, because that argument again is irrelevant. There is no argument about personal perceptions. You can talk about the neuroscience of it and how the hearing works, and you can describe how interference in a room might affect the sound, and describe how when speakers present a dispersion in a room, how it might bounce off the room and how treatments work. And that's a discussion about the physics again. That's not a discussion about our subjective opinion of the sound, whether it's high-pitched or something like a mid-tone, or, like it sounds muddy, or it sounds like any one of these things. I need to call up a little, I need to call up a window here, see if I can, there we go. Let me add this to the stream. So this is like a description of, this is basically an image of words we use to describe sounds, like boosted bass, fat, muddy bass, muddy, boomy. And this is a frequency range here where we have like 40, 50, 80, 100, 200, 400, 600. And it changes to like, what does this say? Disattached? I don't even know that's a hollow bass, where it's like low bass, shy or thin, where it starts to drop off slowly out, like before 100. Hollow voices is about 600. So these are all like descriptive terms to talk about the way that sound, like our perception is. And this is important for each individual person to become very accustomed to, or to take personally. Yeah, sibilance. Like a bunch of snakes. This is exactly what I think. But so when we have these discussions, these terms are not standardized. They're not regulated. They're not habitually taught the same way blue and red and pink and snap. Like, we don't have an exact set of words or adjectives to describe subjective perceptions. But we do have a way to say that's 500 hertz, 700 hertz, 1,000 hertz. So speaking in subjective terms, you could say it's nasally or honky, or like it's vocal. Like, that's a subjective term and a subjective like adjective to describe it. But if you said like it's 1.7 kilohertz, that's very science oriented. There's two different ways to say the same thing. And only through training and practice, listening to things, can we decipher and differentiate these terms and use them effectively with our community. At least I feel anyways. This is where some of the differences come in. There's a lot more that I could say about it. I would love to talk with you guys individually if you have questions. I'm only going to make this about a half hour, so there's about 2 minutes here. But if you guys have any questions in the chat, just ask me anything now based on this video. I don't want to make it too long. I know there's some other things coming on, and I don't want to step on any toes. You know how it is. I'm like the amateur over here for videos. But yeah, I appreciate you guys coming into the chat and listening to this little perceptive talk of mine. I don't know what else to say really at this point. I think that pretty much clears up how I view it. And when I see conversations taking place in YouTube comments and Facebook and forums, and the way that most things go, they talk about, the common thing is to talk about either placement in the room, because, you know, like there's lots of videos. Like I just showed 3 videos on sound. You could easily just watch a video and then you could retype it out on a comment section and sound like you know what you're talking about. It's not necessarily the case. Not everybody that has that writes an opinion understands their opinion. They can just parrot that opinion. I could tell you that, you know, something I saw in the news doesn't mean I was there. Somebody got pulled over on the highway because, you know, some taillight, whatever. And when I write it down or I tell someone, it sounds like on the surface, it sounds like I was there. I watched that happen. Like, no. I read it online. Somebody else saw it and then wrote it and then told me, and then the way I say it makes it sound like I was there. So there's a difference in how the expression of a perception matters. And for me, because I come from like a psychological background and I studied in philosophy, I look at things like phenomenology and kinesiology and the way that we, like the idea of phantom limb, if you guys are familiar with this, where if you have a limb amputated for whatever reason, sometimes those people experience the sensation of like their wrist or their hand itches, or they can feel like their fingers sometimes, but they've had their arm amputated at the bicep or at the elbow, and they no longer have any limbs below their elbow, but in their mind still perceives a hand. This actually happens with sounds as well. That's how mixing and recording engineers are able to do so many different movement changes and tone changes with 2-channel audio, because they're manipulating the sound structure to fool your brain into perceiving that. So we're all familiar with optical illusions, where you can fool your eyes with the angles and depth and shade and shapes. We've seen many things like this. We're used to our eyes being fooled. How many people acknowledge the fact that the same thing can happen with your ears? Binaural beating is the thing that happens, where if you have 700 hertz played only in your right ear and you have 730 hertz played in your left ear, you will get, it's probably easier at lower frequencies. So if you do like 200 and then 240, you get this beating sound between those frequencies. And the beating sound or pulses don't happen in the frequencies, because if you pulled one headphone out or the other, you can look this up on YouTube, binaural beats, you will perceive a beating or a pulsing, but that happens in your brain. When the signals are processed from your left and right ear in that way, they create a different sound that doesn't even exist. Doesn't exist in physical reality, but your mind thinks that it's real. So this is a very important term in our perception of sound to include in a conversation and extend as a part of a conversation to other people, because their words or articulation is not accurate enough, or it's not familiar to us as listeners, or as verbal, our vocabulary doesn't reach quite, who uses words like superfluous instead of sarcastic or shallow, or you know what I mean? Like we don't all read thesaurus and dictionaries to get all these words. Sometimes writers in magazines and, audiophiles that are 70 plus years old have this vocabulary. It doesn't really make the perception much different. It means they can speak well. And we all know, that talking is pretty cheap. Speaking of cheap, that's 33 minutes and 33 seconds right on the dot. I appreciate you guys for being here. And I guess it was. Hey, stop swearing in the comment section, guys. What are you doing? You're going to get me canceled. No, I appreciate you guys for hanging out. I hope this stream serves some of the public or someone out there that takes the earlier videos and puts the whole, facetious. There you go. It's for sarcastic. That's right. Superfluous is like shallow, superficial. But yes, I do hope that the combination of all of the topics here in the videos help to summarize what is going on with sound and how our minds and our vocabulary can become a big problem when it comes to sharing your experiences. I mean, I do this interactively with a lot of people and like to have people host with me so I can see their face. And we'll slowly get back to that. So having said that, thank you guys for joining. I hope it was educational. Let me know in the comments if you weren't here live, what you thought. And I will be available for questions in all of my sites and Facebook and Instagram with the same name. Not this one that you see on screen. I need to change that. But anyhow, thank you guys for coming. I will see you in the comments and talk to you soon.